Okay, so welcome back. Our big topic today is on conducting research online. So you've all been working for a little bit now on your research papers. Last quarter, we worked on how to write a research question and how to write a prospectus. And now the next step in the process is to actually go and conduct the research to answer our research question. Now things are a little bit different this year because we're all under quarantine, so we're only going to talk about the online component of research today. I've posted a helpful handout for you on Plus Portals that you can follow along with as we go through today's presentation. It's called Conducting Research, and you can see here I've outlined all the steps in the process and given you a list of internet sources that you can look at. There's also links for many of these sources on our Plus Portals page. So with that said, let's get started. So now that you all have a research question, the first thing we need to do is to narrow things down a little bit more. There are lots of great tools on the internet and databases that we can search for information on our topics in, but if our ideas are still a little broad, a little unrefined, it's very hard to make a search engine useful if we don't have the right keywords to search for. So before we dig into using some of the more specialized databases, it's a good idea to get a little more general information about our topics and to use some sources which, while they don't count to your quota, will give you some basic ideas and will give you maybe some suggestions of where to look for more serious information or what words to search for. And one of the best places you can start is actually your own regular old Jackson Spielvogel textbook. So I don't know if you've noticed, but at the end of every single chapter in Spielvogel, he provides a list for further reading. So if you open up your book, you can see at the end of every chapter, we've got this whole review section. And a good part of that is devoted to sources for further reading. Let me show you what one of these looks like so we can talk about it. Here's the end of chapter 6 about the Romans. And so you can see we've got our reflection questions, we've got our key terms, but then Spielvogel has also given us these suggestions for further reading. And he's broken this down into a couple of different categories. So you can see, for example, he has general histories of the Roman Empire, Roman emperors, Roman society, Roman culture, early Christianity. And in each of these subheadings, he's given you some sources that are good, legitimate, serious scholarly sources to use for your research. So he's already done all the hard work. He's vetted these sources. He's given you a really tight capsule description of what these are about and why we should use some of these. So if these are some of the topics you're interested in, this is a great place to start your research because he's already done all the hard work. So let's zoom in a little more and look at this section here. So for example, if we look at the section on Roman culture, Spielvogel says, right, for a survey of Roman art, see F.S. Kleiner, A History of Roman Art. Architecture is covered in the standard work by J.B. Ward Perkins, Roman Imperial Architecture. On the importance of concrete in Roman architecture, see L.C. Lancaster, Concrete Vaulted Construction in Imperial Rome. So if the topic that you're thinking about writing about happens to fall under one of these categories, he's already done some of the legwork here and given you some good sources that you can use. Because we know that Jackson Spielvogel is a reputable historian, because we know this is a good textbook, we know that the sources he's using are good sources. So he's already done all the kind of legwork about assessing whether these are credible, reputable sources. Now, not everyone is going to be able to find something in these little bibliographies at the end of each chapter. You know, the topics that he has suggestions for are rather limited, but it may be that the topic you're writing is something that's covered here. Another source that we can use to find sources, and one that I would not want you actually using in the paper itself, is Wikipedia. Right, Wikipedia is not the kind of serious researched source that you should be using for your essays. But if we don't know the keywords to search for in a more specific database or search engine, it's a good place to get basic ideas so that we can narrow down our key terms. But also, many of the articles in Wikipedia have citations as well. and we can raid those citations to find informations for our own sources and for our own essays. So let's take a minute and look at Wikipedia. All right, so here is our Wikipedia homepage, and let's say that I want to write my essay on knights. So let's see what we can find if we search for knights. Okay, so here is the main page on knights. There's a lot of kind of very basic information here. Knighthoods, knights in the Middle Ages, Christian knights. And yeah, this is good to get a very general overview, but again, this is not the kind of source you should be citing for your paper. But if you notice, there are all of these lovely little footnotes here throughout the page. And if we cut down to the bottom and we look at the references, we can see that there is an explanation of what these things are. And now some of these are not the greatest sources in the world. Some of these are not the kinds of things you should be using. Like if we go over here and we look at number 38, how knights work from how stuff works. Not the kind of source you should be using. But if we look at some of these other sources here, we can see that they're much closer to what we should be using. So if we look at 41 here, we have got Clifford J. Rogers, Kelly DeVries, John Frank, Journal of Medieval Military History, Volume 7, Boydell Press. Right, so this is a serious academic journal. Boydell Press is a serious academic press. And if we were interested in whatever this was referencing, I didn't look up top to see what it is, this would be a very good source to use. Or if we go down a little further here, number 43, right, oops. David Crouch, The Image of Aristocracy in Britain, published by Routledge. If we're interested in knights in Britain, this might be a good thing to look at, right? 1000 to 1300, good time period. Routledge is a serious academic press. Sounds good. So you do need to be careful, right? Not all of these are really citations for things that are kind of at the quality that you should be using, but some of them are. If it's an actual physical book, right, and many of the ones here are, the chances are probably better that it's going to be a good source than if it is some random web page. Okay, so now that we've experimented using the textbook and using Wikipedia, hopefully we have a better idea of some search terms we can use in some broader databases. Again, you know, a search engine is only as good as the keywords you put into it. So if you're following along in your handout, we've moved on into the next steps section now. And so one of the first sources I've listed there for you is Google Scholar. And this is a great source for finding all kinds of academic information. But let's just take a step back first and look at regular Google and see why Google Scholar is a better choice. So we'll go back over to the internet here. All right, so remember, we're searching for knights. So let's see what Google gives us. Okay, we've got the Wikipedia article that we just looked at. That's all well and good as a kind of basic pre-research step here. We've already talked about that. Search item number 2 here, Knights Restaurants. That's probably not something that's going to be real useful for our research. I mean, we can check it out. Yeah, so this is not going to be something we can use in our research at all. If we keep scrolling down, we've got a bunch of YouTube videos. Anybody can make a YouTube video. We're on YouTube. Oh, a map of locations of the Knights of Columbus, night restoration services. All right, here's an article about knights in the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's not awful. That is something that's kind of okay. If we scroll down a little further here, we've got Knights in the Middle Ages, Western Reserve Public Media. Let's take a look at that and see what that is. Okay, this doesn't look too terrible. We scroll down, we can see, right, this is put together by some local PBS someplace in the Western United States. But at the same time, do you see how long this document is? It's like, what, 3 paragraphs, half a dozen bullet points? It's not to say that this information is inaccurate or wrong, but this is like not the kind of stuff you should be using. This is not at the right kind of level. This is like middle school kind of level stuff. You guys can do so much better than this. So it's not to say the information here is wrong, it's just not serious enough. It's not at a high enough level for you all. All right, so what else do we have in the regular Google results here? Yeah, Knights of Columbus, again, not helpful. 8 Knights Who Changed History from history.com. You gonna trust a television network that tries to say the pyramids were built by aliens and spends half their time exploring conspiracy theories and talking about pawn shops and people picking through people's abandoned garages? I wouldn't. Not really the best thing you could do. It's not to say that this is a bad web page. I haven't looked at it, but generally the History Channel is not the most credible source in the world these days. All right, so this isn't really panning out for us. So let's go to Google Scholar. And so instead of using regular Google, we are going to go to scholar.google.com. All right, so on the surface, doesn't look too different from regular Google. Let's try searching for knights here and see what comes up. Okay, so source number 1 here, motivation, agency, and public policy of knights, knaves, pawns, and queens. They give you a little abstract here, right? So altruism of professionals and the public service ethos. That doesn't sound like that's really remotely related to what we're doing. Here's a book of the Knights Hospitaller. Short study of the history of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, Rhodes, and Malta. That may be okay. We could check that out. We'll see what that is. Let's go look at the beginning, actually. So Boydell Press, that's a serious academic press that publishes books by reputable scholars. You can see the contents here, Holy War in Jerusalem. These are all in the Middle Ages as well. Maybe this is something we could use if we want to write about knights. Oops, went back too far. If we look at the third source here, the right, Working Men's Democracy, the Knights of Labor in American Politics, that's way out of field for anything that we're covering in this course. So maybe we need to narrow down our sources a little more. If we go up here to the menu button in the corner and we click on that, and if we go down to advanced search, we can edit our search to make it a little bit more precise. Okay, so I really don't want to see all these articles and books about the Knights of Labor. That's an interesting topic to research, but that's modern American history. That's got nothing to do with our medieval knights. So where it says without the words, let's say without labor. Okay, cool. All the articles, all the books about the Knights of Labor are gone now because they're not really relevant to what we're doing. Let's keep going down our list here. Knights Hospitaller, now in third place, we have Knights Landing, second generation Intel Xenon Phi product. Well, I don't really know much about computers, but I'm pretty sure Intel processors have zero to do with medieval knights. So let's get rid of that too. We could go back into our menu and tell Google to also search for things without the word Intel or Xenon in it. But because we know some of the Booleans, the special terms that make Google filter things out, you can see it says minus labor. That means we've cut out labor. Let's say minus Intel as well. And sure enough, now that is gone as well. So that's one of the ways we can manipulate this. Let's say also that, it's clear there are still some random things here that are totally irrelevant, like this thing about human behavior in the welfare state or whatever this knights, knaves, pawn thing is. Why don't we throw in some other keywords? Maybe what I'm really interested in is chivalry. So let's add chivalry up here to our search terms. Okay, we've got some different things now. Present day of the knights of all the orders of chivalry in England. That's still not really what we want because that's modern, but if we keep going, here is a book on chivalry by M. Kean. Let's see what that is. I'm not really sure, but we can see. Okay, so this is a book, clearly, that's been published by Manchester University Press. Let's get rid of that. This is apparently from this book, Gentry Culture in Late Medieval England. It's published by University Press, so that's pretty much a guarantee that this is legitimate, serious source. And you can see they've given us an abstract here. In a period of French cultural dominance, it was in French handbooks of knighthood and in romances in French that the ideals of medieval European chivalry found their most popular expression, and so on and so forth. So this looks like this might be a good source for us to use if we're considering writing about chivalry. So we found something that looks like a good source here in Google Scholar. We need to add it to our bibliography. You guys all have books for your English classes that tell you how to cite sources, and that's well and good. You should be able to use the information on that last page to assemble the source yourself. Or one of the really neat things you can do with Google Scholar is if you notice the little quotation marks down here, if we click on that, Google will tell us the appropriate way to cite this source for a bibliography. So for your bibliographies, you should be using MLA style or Chicago. So you can highlight that and copy and paste that right into your Word document, right into your bibliography if you had wanted to use this. So Google has done a lot of the hard work here for you. If we look at some of these other options here too, you can see that this book chapter by Mr. Kean here has been cited by 944 other people. So if we click on that, it will show us everyone who has cited this book. And there's a good chance that if this book is something that's good for us, many of the people who have cited this book are also things that we should be interested in. So Empire and Magic, or Empire of Magic, Medieval Romance, well, maybe not that. Weber, here's something about England and the Crusades. Behind the Castle Gate, from medieval to Renaissance. A lot of this is kind of like a treasure hunt, right? You don't know what you're going to find until you look. And if you do want to find those good sources, a lot of times you do have to weed through a lot of garbage or a lot of things that are unrelated. So let's go back here again. Another interesting thing here we can do too is you can see Google has this other link that says related articles. So let's click on that and see what it gives us. So this is actually a much better kind of curated list than the people who are citing the book. So you can see here is another book, Chivalry and Violence in Medieval Europe by R.W. Cowper. We've got, I'm not really sure what this is, The Knight in Chivalry. We can click on that and see what that is. That might be something useful. History of Art bibliography. So this looks like, well, it's published by Boydell, so I think this is probably a book. But if we look at the abstract, it says this, well, it covers from its beginnings to the Renaissance, so I guess chronologically that would put us in the right time period. Anyways, this is kind of how doing this kind of research works. You find one good thing and it can often lead you to many other good things. So the advantage of using Google Scholar over regular Google is, one, we're not going to get that link for the Knight's restaurant, steakhouse, whatever that was. We're not going to get some pseudo site from the History Channel claiming that the Knight's Code of Chivalry was influenced by ancient aliens or some other kind of nonsense like that. Instead, we're getting a bunch of reputable academic sources here. Okay, so from Google Scholar, let's move on to one of the other sources on our list, and that is WorldCat. So that is quite simply worldcat.org. And what WorldCat is WorldCat is a global library catalog. So if you go to your local public library, you can look in their catalog, you can see what books they have. And what WorldCat does is it takes all of those library catalogs for pretty much every library in the world and lets you search them all at once. So instead of just worrying about what's in the Farmers Branch Public Library or what's in the Arlington Public Library, we can search pretty much every library in the world. So let's search for knights here as well and see what we can come up with. Okay, the Knights by Aristophanes, that is not going to cut it. Aristophanes, right, ancient Greek playwright. Not the kind of knights we're talking about. Again, it's going to take some fussing with this to figure out what's appropriate. So here, for example, here's a book that says Knights by Philip Steele. And right away, WorldCat is telling us that the intended audience for this book is elementary and junior high school. So what does that mean for you? It means you're not in elementary or junior high school. You're in high school now. So this is not the kind of book you should be using. Is it a good book? Does it have good information? Maybe. I'm not familiar with it. But it's not written at the kind of level that you guys should be using. We can see here's something else, right? Juvenile audience. Juvenile audience. So, again, if you are a sixth grader and you want to learn about knights, these are maybe good books. I don't know, but they're not the kinds of books you should be using in this kind of research essay. So again, knights doesn't really seem to be the best keyword to use here. Let's add knights and chivalry again. That seemed to give us some good results in Google Scholar. All right, knights and chivalry. Yeah, I don't know. Casemate Publishers, that sounds kind of hokey. I don't know who they are. Chivalry, here's that book by M. Keene, again, that we were looking at before. This edition is apparently published by the Folio Society, but we know that's good. So let's actually look at Maurice Keene's book here. We already looked at it under Google Scholar, but let's see what we can divine, what we can get out of this from WorldCat. Okay, so here you can see they've given us some of the subject headings here that this book is classified under. So as it turns out, one of the subjects it's classified under is chivalry. So if we use the subject heading here to search for chivalry, if we click on this link, that will hopefully be a little more efficient than me just randomly searching for chivalry. All right, so you've got another book on chivalry. It's published by Macmillan in 1911. That's like 110 years old. Probably not the best source, probably dated by now. History does change, believe it or not. There's another copy of Keene's book. Here is something else. Anyways, a lot of this is just trial and error. You have to look, you have to see. I've been doing this a long time, so I know who most of the serious academic publishers are. But, if you don't know, so let's say Folio Society, well, who is that? I don't know. Is that someone who publishes children's books? Is that someone who publishes serious scholarly works? You can search for the publisher and you can see what we can find out about them on the web. So let's look for the Folio Society. All right, the Folio Society, beautifully illustrated hardcover books. All right, so you can see it's going to take a little more work. We're going to have to look a little bit harder and then try and figure out who these people are. I can tell you they're okay for what we're doing, but for some of these other publishers, it may take a little bit of Googling to figure out if these are appropriate publishers or not. But generally speaking, anything that's published by a university press is fine. Another kind of way we can sort of work around this and figure things out, if we go back to WorldCat. Oh, where is my WorldCat window? There we go. So let's look at Maurice Keene's book here again. We'll go to the page for it. Let's see where we could find a copy of Maurice Keene's book. Who owns this book that we could borrow it if we really wanted to? So you've got the University of Dallas, you've got the University of Texas at Dallas, SMU, Irving Public Library, University of Texas Southwestern Medical School. All right, if you look at the places that have a copy of this book, you notice the top 3 are all colleges or all universities. So if it's a book that a college owns that has a copy of, there's also a very high probability that it is a legitimate, reputable source. Whereas if all we were seeing were public libraries, if Irving Public Library and Dallas Public Library and Carrollton Public Library were the only things that we saw, that might be an indication to us that it's a less serious source. But since we can see that the people who own copies of this book are predominantly universities, there's a very good chance this is a serious scholarly source, if we didn't already know who the Folio Society was. All right, so we've covered Google Scholar, we've covered WorldCat. Let's move on and let's talk about JSTOR. So this is quite simply jstor.org. So JSTOR is another great source. First off, pretty much everything in JSTOR is an academic source. It's already pre-vetted for you. If it is in JSTOR, it is very likely a source that is good for you to use. Whereas WorldCat, it's anything any library anywhere in the world owns, and that includes lots of children's books, which are fine for children, but we're in high school. So let's go back here and let's run our search for nights here as well and see what we can get. Actually, you know what? Change my mind. Let's go back and talk about Rome. Let's search for ancient Rome and see what we can find. Article from Scientific American, article about bribes, hypothermia in ancient Rome, coring in ancient Rome, keys of ancient Rome. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here about ancient Rome. Look, we can see there are almost 260,000 things, and there's no way we could look at this. And depending on what we want to do, some of these things may be useful, some of these things might not be. I don't really want to look at 260,000 different things to figure out what is most useful for me. So we need to refine our sources a little more. We need to refine our search. So just like in Google Scholar, we can use the advanced search to further refine things. So search for Rome. Let's add in, we want to look for gladiators. Let's start with that and we will go from there. We could also change it so that we could filter out things, right? We could take out gladiators if we wanted articles about Rome that didn't have gladiators in them, but let's, for the moment, look for articles that do have gladiators. Okay, so from nearly 260,000 results, now we are down to about 3,600 results. So we've drastically narrowed down the number of sources here. And since I know I want to write about gladiators, we can much more easily look at articles and things that are just about gladiators. If we were actually going to go on and write the research paper this quarter, one thing we could do to further change this is we could look at the link on the left here that says content I can access. So, you know, we're all homebound, right? We can't go down to SMU or go to our local public library and get things, and even if we could, they'd be closed. So if we want to just find things we can look at right now online, we can click on content I can access. And it has given me a list of things that now are things I could click on and look at right now. So here, for example, looking at athletics in the 4th century, the unification of spectacle landscape in the East and West, that doesn't sound like what we want. Spectacle of justice, that could be more in line with what I want to write about gladiators. Let's take a look at that. Okay, and here you can see we could just get down to business and we could start reading this. Yeah, so yeah, the trick with all of these search engines is it takes a lot of time. You know, once you find a couple good sources, it may be easy to find a bunch of others. You know, another really useful thing about scholarly sources like the one here is they have lots and lots of footnotes. And if you find one good source, you can often raid the footnotes of that source to get lots of other things. So we can see here, what does this say? M. Carucci, the Romano-African Domis Studies in Space. That doesn't sound like what I want for gladiators. Maybe on one of the other pages there's something good. It's a nice picture. The game of death in ancient Rome, arena sport, political suicide. Maybe that might be a good thing. That sounds like a plausible thing if we want to write about gladiators. So sometimes all you really need is one good source, and if you raid the footnotes, the references of that source, you can find a ton of other good things. So JSTOR is useful in that everything in it, right, is a serious scholarly source. Whereas, WorldCat, for example, is going to give you a lot of things that may be about the topic you're writing on, but aren't necessarily appropriate. All right, so there's one more of these sources that I want to talk about, and that is EBSCO. So EBSCO is a database that most libraries in Texas pay for. Most public libraries are involved in a state consortium that has this database. And some public libraries, though not all, it depends, will allow you to use this database from the comfort of your own home. It really depends on your local library, and the best way to find out is simply to go to your local public library's webpage and see if they offer remote or home access to EBSCO, or the particular subset of EBSCO that's most useful for you is Academic Search Complete. So my local public library does allow me to use this from home. Yours may as well. So this is another place we can find sources as well. And the principle is the same, right? We type in our keywords, it will return a bunch of books, a bunch of journal articles. We can filter through it. If your library doesn't have access to EBSCO or doesn't allow you to use it from your own home, you can find more than enough sources without using this one. But I wanted to let you know that this is also something you can do in our current quarantine situation, depending on your municipality. So this pretty much covers our secondary sources. One of the other things that I want you to be finding for your bibliographies are more primary sources. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I do have several collections of these already for you on PlusPortals, and you may have used some of these last quarter. So let's take a second now and just look at some of those and how they can be useful for you in your research. Okay, so if we open up PlusPortals to the page for our course and we scroll down to the bottom, we have links section. And I apologize, my version looks a little bit different from yours. Unfortunately, there's no way in PlusPortals I can show you exactly what it looks like for you. But if you go to the links section, you'll notice that there is kind of this generic class folder where things like the link to our Zoom meeting are. But there's also this second section called Primary Source Collections. And if we bring that up, it has a number of different online collections we can use to find primary sources. So of course, you're more than welcome to use your document reader. You're more than welcome to use any of the primary sources in your Spielvogel textbook. But depending on what your topic is, those may not be useful for what you want to do. So there are a number of things here you can use. The first one here, the German Historical Institute's collection, is actually a little bit too late chronologically for most of the topics that you're doing, so we won't talk about that. The next one on the list here is the Avalon Project. And the Avalon Project is mostly focused on legal history. So let's click on that and see what we can find. So you can see that the web page is organized chronologically. So most of you should be doing topics that would fall under the ancient or the medieval periods here. So let's see what we've got for ancient documents. You can see they don't have as much for the ancient period as they do for some of the more recent periods, but they have given us some good primary sources here that might be useful to the paper we're writing. So for example, they've got Athens's Constitution. They've got probably a fuller version of Hammurabi's Code than what's in your textbook. They've got the 12 tables. And yeah, if we click on any of these, it will bring up the information here. You can see they've got a couple of different versions of this one. Actually, this looks like this might be a secondary source. So you do need to be careful, but there are a number of primary sources here. Probably the one that says translated is the actual document. Yeah, here we go. Here's the actual primary source document. So if you wanted a fuller or different version of the Code of Hammurabi, that would be one place you could look. Anyways, this is basically what the Avalon project is. It's mostly legal stuff. Maybe this is useful, maybe it's not. It depends on what your project is. If we go back to Plus Portals, the next thing on our list is British History Online. As the name suggests, you're only going to find sources about British things here. So if you're writing about Roman gladiators, you're probably not going to find anything useful in British History Online. If we're writing about knights, though, maybe we will. So let's take a look. Okay, so British History Online contains many primary sources. So if we go down here, we can see here's the section for primary sources. They've got a whole big list of things. That's nice if you know exactly what you're using, but hard to say if you don't know what all these sources are. You know, like the Cumberland and Westmoreland Antiquarian, unless you're specifically writing your essay about Cumberland and Westmoreland, I don't know if that would be even remotely useful. It could be, but who knows? But if we scroll down, we can see here they'll also let us search by period. So let's see what we've got for the early Middle Ages. Okay, so this actually is mostly some of the county histories. These actually aren't really primary sources, but maybe if we look at the ancient period, there's something better. This is how it works a lot of times with these web pages. It's trial and error. And that's also the Victoria County histories in about the 13th century. Okay, so here we've got patent rolls, we've got records of different cities and things. You know, some of this stuff is probably a little bit too specialized for you, but maybe some of it works. It depends. You know, and like all these sources, we could also just run a generic source and we could see what comes up. All right, so let's go back to Plus Portals again. A good kind of general purpose collection that's useful for pretty much everyone is the Fordham or the Halsell collection of source books. So this was probably one of the earliest online collections of source books, and there are tons and tons of sources on pretty much everything. They're broken down into different subfields: ancient history, medieval history, modern history, Byzantine studies, or by geographic areas or religion. Let's click over and look at the medieval source book. So we can see, it's been a long time since I've used this, I apologize. Looks like we have to pick a little further section here. So let's say we're interested in Anglo-Saxons. Okay, so here we've got a whole big list of things. Look, they've got a whole big extended copy of Bede. You remember the venomous Bede? We talked about him in class. You've got some Anglo-Saxon chronicles from the age of Alfred. You have got some stuff about the church. You've got some stuff about government. Anyways, you know, a lot of this is just trial and error. It's just looking at these things, seeing what they are. Even though this is ostensibly a collection of primary sources, there are some secondary sources mixed in as well. So you do need to kind of look and see if something is really a primary or a secondary source. But yeah, this is a very old, very kind of venerable collection from kind of the prehistoric days of the internet. Some of the links don't work anymore, but generally it is a pretty good collection of things if you're looking for primary sources. And if we go back to Plus Portals, there's one other kind of good collection here. This is Hanover College's collection. So you can see they have things divided by different regions, different periods as well. Let's look at ancient Greece and Rome. And you can see here they've got a ton of stuff as well. Not nearly as much as some of the others, but you know, it depends on what you're interested in. Maybe it's going to be useful for you, maybe it isn't. Okay, so those are some of the big collections of sources you can use, both primary and secondary sources. You know, good luck. It this can be a time-consuming process. If you're lucky, maybe you could do this in 20 minutes if you hit a good source right away. Maybe it'll take you a couple hours. It really is a treasure hunt. That's a lot of what research is doing. There is an awful lot of stuff that's either totally inappropriate to what you're doing or just not at the right scholarly level, but you need to weed through those things. So good luck on making your bibliographies, and I will see you all in class soon. Thanks.